Hi, I'm Don Boomgaarden, president of St. Joseph's University, New York, and I'd like to welcome you to Living Our Mission. Founded by the Sisters of St. Joseph more than 100 years ago, St. Joseph's University is a mission-driven institution that provides a strong academic, value-oriented education with campuses in Patchogue and Brooklyn, as well as online. Thank you for joining us. In this program, we will touch on the history of St. Joseph's University, New York, the involvement of the Sisters of St. Joseph, and our recent upgrades to two historic areas of our Brooklyn campus, the Kennedy Chapel and the Lady Chapel. Here to talk more about these topics are Sister Marie Mackey, CSJ, Campus Ministry Assistant and former Director of Campus Ministry for the Brooklyn campus, and Dr. Phil Denny, Executive Dean for the Brooklyn campus. So I'm very happy to have both of you here with me today, and we're sitting in this gorgeously renovated chapel, and we're going to talk about that. But first, our guests may not know, but Dr. Denny is a very accomplished historian, focusing primarily on the First World War in that time zone. He's been here at St. Joseph's for a good amount of time as a professor, as a tenured full professor, and he was kind enough to become our executive dean a few years ago. I hope he's not regretting that decision. Phil, as a trained historian, when you look at a school like St. Joseph's, it has such an interesting history. What would you say are some of the most important historical moments for the university?
I mean, I'm always blown away by the founding of St. Joe's. I mean, to think of the audacity to create a college. Can you imagine creating a college? 12 students deciding that this was a good idea. But I mean, I think that right from the start, the school's always been sort of very interested in getting people into the school who've generally been underserved. And I think at the start it was this dozen Catholic women who needed to get educated. I mean, I think they were probably very indicative of the need here in Brooklyn. It was a dozen Irish Catholic women, and over time this mission has expanded. They eventually started letting Italian women in, and then they branched out to non-Catholics in the early 70s. Men were allowed to come into the school. I mean, at every moment, the school's been sort of keeping up with the needs of the community, I think. And it's always been very pivotal in sort of, again, like the underserved populations of New York City. Since then, the growth has been, the underserved populations in New York has changed over time. And we've been branching out into more international students. It's been an interesting evolution over time.
I think for me, I guess I'm a music historian, and I was trained to look through history through the eyes of musicians, which is an interesting perspective. But when I look at St. Joseph's from a historical point of view, I think what's really striking is what you mentioned, is the adaptability of the sisters to the changing times around them. And when we look at education today, we see a tremendous amount of change and turmoil. And many colleges and universities have existential issues, which thankfully we don't, but many of them are really struggling. And so this is a time that really calls on us to show that kind of adaptability that the sisters showed throughout their history, really.
I'd agree. I mean, some people believe that this is a moment where sort of crisis in higher education. There's some degree of truth to that, perhaps, but I mean, I think that this is also a time of a whole lot of opportunity, and part of the adaptability that we're all sort of coming to terms with now is, I think, the adaptability towards sort of technology and the possible uses of technology. We and I think many other schools around the country are sort of trying to figure out what is the best modality of learning. What is the correct balance between virtual and online and in-person learning. In-person learning, I think many of us believe, is sort of the best sort of learning style for most students, but there is sort of a balance to be had. And that's something I think higher education throughout the United States is sort of trying to come to terms with right now. especially post-COVID?
Well, I think that I'm not an expert on Chinese, but I believe the same symbol for crisis is a symbol for opportunity. And so it's a crisis, but it's also an opportunity for us to reevaluate our mission and our identity, who we are, and to ask, really important questions about where we want to go in the future. And that leads me, Sister Marie, to the question of, when you talk to outsiders, particularly those that maybe not are from the Catholic tradition, how would you describe the mission of the Sisters of St. Joseph?
I think when we talk about the mission, we go back to our early documents, and there's a term, the dear neighbor. And that sense that dear neighbor is the person who's closest to me at any given moment. So right now, Phil's right next to me. You're here in this room. There are other people here. They're my dear neighbor. And that sense of inclusiveness, the inclusiveness that the Gospels witness to in terms of Jesus, especially including women in a man's world. So I think our message and the gospel message of unifying love, reconciliation is so needed and so valid in our world today. And I think it goes beyond any particular religious tradition and really is the underpinning of any of the major world religions that we are aware of.
Mm-hmm. I think for me, as you speak, I'm very aware of that larger encompassing mission of the sisters. I'm the chair of the Association of the Colleges and Universities of the Sisters of St. Joseph, so it's a great honor for me to be able to be in that position. And so I frequently talk to the presidents of the other CSJ schools. And another question I'm often asked is, well, we understand if that's the mission of the sisters was to the focus on charitable works and on the dear neighbor, how did they get involved in universities and colleges and the whole K through 12 scene? So tell us a little bit about the interesting focus of the sisters on education.
I think a lot of that really happened when they came here to America in 1836. When they were in France, and I think many religious communities that were founded of women, we would use the term social worker, like whatever the need was, they were handling. Orphanages, education, hospital. But when they came here, the bishops here we were not the United States at that point, but they knew that they had an immigrant population of Catholics that were coming from Europe, and they wanted them educated because, when you were talking about underserved populations, Catholics and Protestants did not have the easiest relationship here. And so oftentimes Catholics were marginalized. And so a goal really of the bishops was to create their own educational system. And so for better or worse, women religious really became the workforce of the bishops. But then oftentimes when they were working in parishes, they were not getting any kind of remuneration for that. So they would also have their own academies where people could afford things like piano lessons. And so any monies that they were receiving in their academies were able to support the greater mission. And then really, I think the sisters pretty much took it upon themselves. Mother Mary Lewis, who was the General Superior for 40 years of the Sisters of St. Joseph of Brentwood, died in 1932. But it was young women who were coming back from their college experiences who had graduated the Academy of St. Joseph, who were talking about their experiences of being marginalized in their universities. And so Mother Mary Lewis's dream, believe it or not, was to build the college on the Brentwood campus. And it was the Bishop of Brooklyn who said, no, I want it in Brooklyn. And so for the congregation then, Mother Mary Lewis was very, very strong about higher education for her own sisters. And so even in the 1920s, we had a disproportionate amount of sisters who already had their doctorates. And so the preparation was there. And it was now really a matter of execution. But I do, as Phil said, think it was very audacious to think about, creating a college and what that involved. And we've seen the role that not only the Sisters of St. Joseph, but so many women religious have played in the area of education and healthcare in this country. And Vatican II basically said, go back to your roots and look at your constitutions. And that's how a lot of communities were like, oh, we could also be doing this ministry. And for us, prison ministry was very much part of what we were doing in France. So that sort of got resurrected as well for our congregation. But Mother Mary Louis opened 39 schools. St. Joseph's, she opened a hospital, all during her tenure. So education was very, very important.
I think it's fascinating too that the mission of the Dear Neighbor was the impetus for the creation of many things, not just colleges and universities and schools, but the programs of the sisters are generated out of this sense of a deeper mission. And I think that may be, at the end of the day, one of the greatest strengths of St. Joseph's, because it doesn't exist just to give you a wonderful certificate or a diploma, or even to get you a job, although all those things will happen. But there's a deeper mission to the school, which permeates, I think, everything that we do here. So that the idea, the audaciousness of starting the school is a manifestation of that sense of mission. And I think, for our viewers today, that's an interesting thing to think about, to meditate on, that the sense of mission gives you the courage to do all kinds of audacious things, which otherwise everyone would tell you, well, that's impossible. If you just look at a spreadsheet, you'd say, yeah, it's impossible to do that. But if you're coming at it from the viewpoint of mission, then the idea of founding a university or maintaining a university makes perfect sense. Because how better to reach into the hearts and minds of young people and adults than through education?
Right, and education is the underpinning. Right now we have about 40 Afghan and Ukrainian refugees on our property in Brentwood that we're housing. First thing, we're setting them up to learn English. And then the next thing is vocational training, getting their GED, to be able to give them a launching pad to move ahead. And we've already had some families that in a year and a half have been able to do that with the support, but really the underpinning of education to be able to move on with their lives.
So the mission of the sisters continues. It continues to adapt and change to the situation around us. And I believe it's fair to say there's no less dedication and love of the institution and of education and teaching, but the times also require us to look in other areas. And we're going to talk a little bit in the next segment about how those things intersect, because the university itself is a microcosm of the universe. And because of that, all of the issues that the sisters are dealing with on the outside are issues that we're also dealing with on the inside. We have to take a quick break, but still to come, more about our history and the mission of the Sisters of St. Joseph. Welcome back to St. Joseph's University, New York, living our mission. I'm speaking today with Sister Marie Mackey and Dean Phil Denny of our Brooklyn campus about the history of St. Joseph's University. We're going to talk also a little bit about some really beautiful renovations that have occurred. But before I go there, Phil, you could have taught in many institutions and chosen many institutions to work at. What led you to come here to St. Joseph's? And what has sustained you? What has kept your interest in working with us here?
It's a great question. I've been here since 2001, so it's quite a while. I knew I wanted to work in a small school. St. Joe's certainly fits that bill. There's something of very, you get to know people very quickly. when you're at a small school, and you get to know them pretty well when you're at a small school as well. I certainly frankly, Brooklyn and the neighborhood was tremendously appealing it's still incredibly appealing, but coming here 20 years ago, Brooklyn was kind of the center of like global culture in 2001. It was like the hippest neighborhood on the planet at that point. So getting a job offer here was really extremely enticing. And certainly being in Brooklyn for the last 20 some years it's been a wonderful privilege to live here and to work around here. The best part has been the people I've been working with and the personalities of the people. Everyone's always been so friendly. And when I first got here, there were still a number of nuns here. They sort of, I think, set the standard for kind of they were always very interesting and fun and interested in just a variety of things. Sister Margaret Buckley, who was the dean when I first got here for the first maybe 8 or 9 years I was here, she would always sort of support really anything I wanted to do. I was working with the honors program on trips and things like that. She said, definitely go for it. She was a really sort of actively engaged in trying to help me and help some other young faculty sort of do new things at the school. So the spirit of innovation of the sisters came through in her. For me, it came through in her. I really admire Sister Margaret tremendously. It's been a real privilege to work here.
Well, I think they clearly saw something in you, right? And also maybe that sense of audacity and the sense of mission, I think spills over into the spirit of the institution and the support for all kinds of different endeavors with the faculty and with the students, and that desire to say yes to situations. Yes, why don't you do that? Why don't you try that? And the ability to see God in all things, and to see that there is some kind of purpose to what you're doing, even when those around you may doubt you. Now, sadly, the decline of numbers of religious across the country is very noticeable. We all know about that problem. I know the Sisters of St. Joseph have some plans of dealing with that. I've spent many years at Jesuit institutions, and that's a frequent topic of conversation. How can we maintain the spirit of our founding orders in an institution where we don't have the sisters anymore? We have a few sisters still working with us, such as Sister Marie and some sisters in Long Island. But Phil, how do we bring that ethos into the classroom now without the sisters being present?
It's a wonderful question. I mean, I think part of it is, I think the history of the sisters is sort of embedded in our curriculum in large part. I mean, Sister Marie was talking a bit about the strengths of our education programs here, or the importance of education to the sisters, but the incredible importance of education of child study and adolescent ed to our programming. I mean, we have so many teachers around the city and really around the world that we've created here. I think similarly with our nursing and our sort of health-focused programs, this idea of being sort of helping and caring people and getting our students to become that is one of the things that sort of is a hallmark of a St. Joseph's education, and it's seen in certainly in those majors, but really I think throughout the curriculum in all of the majors. Our core curriculum is really sort of, I think it has the sort of the history of the sisters embedded in it. I mean, we've had the 100 years of the sisters being in charge of this institution really for it's been a long time. The next 100 years probably won't be quite like that, but the legacy of the sisters is, I'm sure it's going to live on and thrive in the second century of St. Joe's.
Well, it's important for us, for you and I, and for all the leaders of the institution to always be mindful of that mission, even when we talk about new programs. So when you and I talk about new programs, we're always like, well, does that fit into our mission? Is that the kind of program that really is all about the dear neighbor and is all about raising the community around us, and not just about our personal prestige or about money? And so, our focus on healthcare, our focus on education, even our business programs are crafted to help people to go out and do good in the world.
Absolutely. I mean, we want to attract students. We want to attract more students usually. We want to attract good students, but we want to attract St. Joe's students. And we want to attract the kind of students who really believe in what we believe in this sort of this mission to do good in the world. and to keep the legacy going.
And that's, I would say that to any of our younger viewers out there, that if you want to choose a school that has a long history of social involvement and a long history of transformational efforts, this is the place to go, because we're not beginners in this area. We have been in the forefront of many, many crucial areas involving social justice and involving improving the community around the institution. And I know the Sisters of St. Joseph as well have been very, very involved in not just their own spirituality, but in the community around them.
Just to add to what Phil said, his experience of 20 years ago, I can go back to 40 years ago when I was a student, and Sister Margaret Buckley was one of my mentors. But I have to say, my experience as a student here, the sisters were very engaged with the students. And I was just sharing with Phil, I was an English major, and one of our professors, Sister Margaret Jennings, the last class every semester, she would invite the students over to her. She lived with 3 other Sisters of St. Joseph, and she'd make breakfast for us. The president at the time that I was here, Sister George Ackwin, Sister Elizabeth was her assistant, very accessible to the students and very, very supportive. And I think the other piece that I still find 40 years later is the students and faculty here are collaborative rather than competitive. And I think that makes a big difference, because if our world is going to continue, we need to really work more on collaboration and not competing against one another.
And I think it's interesting you mentioned that, because I was just speaking with the director of our nursing program, Maria Fletcher, and one of the things she said that was unique and special about us is when we admit a student in nursing, they have a place in nursing. It's not like in 3 years we're going to reevaluate and see if you really do have a place in nursing, but you have a place. Now she says it's your place to lose.
Right.
In other words, you have to work hard to keep it. But when we take you in with the full expectation of you graduating and going out in the world, and you don't have to compete with your fellow students for your place. It's here for you. It's really a question of what can you do with that opportunity. How can you shape and mold that opportunity into your future and into your career? But you're absolutely right that spirit of cooperation, and I certainly see that at the higher levels. So when I talk to the other presidents of the colleges and universities of St. Joseph, we do a lot of things together collaboratively. We sponsor pilgrimages and other types of things. And I think that spirit of collaboration is so critical right now when we look at the state of the world. But before we spend too much time on the state of the world, because I'm not sure we're going to solve that today, I know you, Sister, were very involved in the recent renovations, the Kennedy Chapel, Burns Hall, the Lady Chapel, and the McIntaggart Library. Tell us a little bit about these spaces and what we did to them.
Well, these spaces have been here for many, many years, and it was always a gathering space. I was actually part of the folk group. So we had Mass here a couple of days during the week, again, with the sisters. And over time, when I came back and we would have events with a lot of alum, realizing that the pews, were almost 100 years old and very hard to navigate. And that's so typical now. And so really the first thing that I spoke to Rory Schaefer-Walsh about was, could we move the pews out and have chairs? And this happened literally on the cusp of COVID. Like, we were having this discussion January, February, and March we were out of here. And so it kind of was on the burner, off the burner. And when we decided to move forward with it, the alumni support was so great for it, and some requests to also kind of lighten up the space. And so we went from just chairs and a floor and new carpeting to panels now. So the walls were taken down and lighter panels were stained. And then looking at the 4 statues that we wanted in here, of course, Mary and Joseph always have their place. But also what was significant in terms of the history of the Sisters of St. Joseph, so that anyone coming into this chapel would say, why is that there? And so one of them is St. Ignatius of Loyola. Sisters of St. Joseph were founded, 6 women and a Jesuit priest, Father Jean-Pierre Médaille. And so our spirituality is really an Ignatian spirituality. But our feast day is our Founders' Day is on October the 15th, which is the feast of St. Teresa of Avila, first woman doctor of the church. And she was a mystic and a writer, and was often held with some suspicion of church leadership. And she always found her way out of a crisis. So we look to someone like St. Teresa of Avila, a scholar, and I think about my own congregation of women scholars. So that was the next thing. And then, it was the tabernacle. It became new altar cloths, and a number of other items, including a new piano. So,
yes, I believe at the end of the day we raised close to $300,000,
Yes.
And it shows you the alums, their love of the institution. Wonderful alum, Mary Butts, gave us the funding for our piano, and of course, I find it actually kind of humorous that we have St. Ignatius and St. Teresa here, because they were both big troublemakers in the church, and had a tremendous impact. And of course, it's so connected to the sisters. So it's delightful, and I hope visitors coming to our campus can come to this chapel sometime and view it. It is really quite beautiful. So, Sister Marie, along with the wonderful renovations in this chapel, we also renovated our spaces in McIntaggart Hall. Tell us a little bit about that space.
the Lady Chapel has always been a place of sanctuary for certainly students to go in there, and we've decided that that's more of a meditative chapel. Having a glass door also on it makes the students and staff aware that this is a place that they can come for quiet. And so oftentimes when I'm passing that area, I will see students and staff in there as well. It's very, very simple. It's not as elaborate as this chapel, but in its simplicity, it's also very profound.
I think that, and the viewers should know, we also have interfaith spaces on both of our campuses. We have many students, Muslim students and students of other denominations, Jewish students, and so they also have opportunities as well. And of course, it emphasizes the importance of spirituality to us and spiritual depth, whatever one's faith, when they come to St. Joseph's. Well, thank you, Sister Marie and Phil, for joining me today. And thank you in the audience for joining us today as well. Thank you for watching St. Joseph's University, New York, Living Our Mission.